Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. 28th of November, just getting ready for the outsiders, and I think the first moondog will be happening as well.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not.
Many thanks to all concerned for these next 20 minutes of Champagne Radio. They are Mark DiStefano, political editor at BuzzFeed Oz, Jessica Kendall, Senior Communications Advisor for Essential Media Communications, and Ian Hankey, CEO of PMC Group. Welcome all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
G'day. Oh, there you all are. It's delightful. What did you all think of the Rufus Songlark? Yes, I thought so. Yeah, okay. Paris.
Might have been. No, I won't go.
Good. Paris. So as we head the 130 world leaders to the Paris conference beginning tomorrow, and some discussion about it locally. Bill Shorten coming up with another climate target to be pursued by the ALP, 45% cut in emissions by 2030. Prime Minister Turnbull somewhat unimpressed.
He set some high targets, but he's given no indication of how they could be met, how they could be affordably met, and such analysis as exists would suggest that the cost of meeting such very high cuts in emission, which would be way out of line with other comparable countries. So it's a heroic offer that he's made.
Heroic or necessary, Mark DiStefano? I mean, is Bill Shorten so Despies now, Mr. 19%, that he's talking policy? That's taking things to extremes.
That's the one thing I think that Labor people keep, patting themselves on the back about the last few weeks. As his opinion polls keep plunging, one of the good things that they sort of keep pointing to is that as opposition leader, Bill Shorten is not going to do the Tony Abbott style of just refusing to play ball. He is trying to put forward an agenda. We've seen that this week, not just with climate change, but there was also the domestic violence leave that they put forward, and
Cigarette tax as well. Of course.
Cigarette tax. So it was a three-pronged attack this week, and it was pretty impressive. But I think that what we found is that Malcolm Turnbull is, I guess he's right when it comes to this stuff. Bill Shorten has set an ambitious target, didn't really lay out more policy than that. It was a very symbolic announcement, though. And the one thing I will say is it's good to have, the government going out and saying, and not sort of launching a scare campaign against Bill Shorten, the same way that Tony Abbott did. He was leading from the front and saying that this is, the only way that Bill Shorten and Labor know how to act on climate change is through, an electricity bill tax. The one good thing is at least that, the government isn't launching a scare campaign against Bill Shorten's climate change proposals. And that is one thing next year we're probably not going to see, which is a carbon tax debate leading into the next election, which we're all so tired of.
I wonder, Jessica Kendall, whether Shorten's they're backing on, we're about to head into 2 weeks of, not intensive coverage, but a certain consciousness of climate change with the Paris conference. He's trying to piggyback on that. Does that tap into public sentiment around this as an idea? I mean, where's the public mood at on climate?
Yeah, look, I think definitely, Jonathan. I think where climate change was sort of a bit of a net negative issue for Labor under Abbott, there's a whole lot of opportunities for Labor here now because, under Turnbull, this can now be a bit of a classic wedge issue. Labor is actually being more ambitious than the government in terms of what they're setting up to take to Paris. And look, as Mark said, they had to be on the record. There has been quite a bit of conversation and not a lot of detail about how it's going to be delivered. And we hear that they're going to do this round of consultations, which is really code for, we might need to walk this back a little bit. We're going to go and talk to everyone about it. Let's just keep a bit of wiggle room up our sleeves. But I think that obviously it's going to be on the agenda. It's going to be on the agenda in a way that the government itself can't really control, and that's all happening before Christmas. And the public are tuned into these issues now in a way that they probably weren't, a couple of months ago.
It's a tricky thing, isn't it, Ian, though, for Malcolm Turnbull, because there's this perception thing about him that he's all over climate change like a rash and wants to do more than his party will let him.
Well, the simple fact is that a lot of people, we discussed this maybe 2 months ago when Mr. Turnbull won leadership. People are investing their own hopes and values in Mr. Turnbull. Nothing has actually fundamentally changed with Liberal Party policy, and nor will it. on this particular issue.
Leader can drive that.
He is actually constrained by the party room, and negotiations are being conducted within that. That's simple reality. That's been, there's nothing new in what I'm saying. Now, people are saying, because Mr. Turnbull has previously been, seen to be, stronger on this and say what Mr. Abbott is, the party has got a position, and Mr. Turnbull will adhere to that position.
This is hard for his personal brand, though. No. It starts to look like he doesn't believe himself.
No. The simple fact is that what we will end up taking, or what the party is, or the government is taking to Paris, is about a mid-range policy comparable to many, with an outcome comparable to many of our trading partners and like countries. That's quite a reasonable, easy position to have and defend. Whereas Mr. Turnbull, Mr. Shorten's policy is just actually, here's a figure, 45%. Don't know how we'll do it. Don't know how we'll get there. Don't know how much it's going to cost. And perhaps we better go and do some consultation as well. That is not a policy. And he is leaving himself vulnerable to the simple fact of saying, well, how are you going to cost it? It can, as we discussed off air, these can be economic arguments as well. And by not actually having a real policy, but just an overly ambitious target, he leaves himself vulnerable in other areas of policy debate.
And that's an interesting point, Mark, isn't it? I mean, there is that exposed flank there. I mean, we're not having that conversation now, and we seem to have moved into a slightly elevated plane, but to leave yourself exposed to cost of living conversation, to sort of the great big tax on everything kind of attack, is that foolish on Shorten's part?
I don't think that the Malcolm Turnbull PMC are going to run that line against Labor heading into the next election. I don't think it's going to be a scare campaign on climate change. Bill Shorten has so many other concerns when it comes to trying to connect with the public. If he thinks that it's going to be a climate change election, he's wrong. It's going to be based on so many other things. And I do think that it was encouraging him announcing a policy at all. Like, it is good that he is trying to go ambitious.
We put our
expectations really, really low. But I mean, but we saw, again, this is what the organisers said, but apparently 60,000 people were out in Melbourne. We're going to see tens of thousands of people out today in Sydney marching for climate change. They're all good things. It's good. It's going to be an interesting way that, nightly news will be covering.
You're unimpressed by that,
Listen, Mark, I've seen all of this so many times before, and it means nothing.
No, what I mean to say,
the simple fact is that before each of these major COP conferences, you see an elevated interest by the media in the issue. You see more extravagant claims being made about potential outcomes if we don't tackle this disastrous man-made disease or whatever.
But we are having a large,
but what I'm saying, we see this all the time. There is nothing new, and it will not substantially. It will not substantially change the approach that the government is taking, and it will not actually change the voter outcome at all.
I agree, and I don't think that we're going to have a cost of living election when it comes to climate change next year. I think that Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull, there's not that much difference between the two. They could actually be in the same party when it came to climate change policy if they could run their own parties the way they wanted to. So I just don't think that we're going to have electricity bill, the sort of scary overlord that Peter Credlin and Tony Abbott created, that Greg Hunt was hammering down in Parliament all the time. I don't think we're going to have that leading into next year. I do agree with you. It's just the end of the year. Everyone's just looking for something new to say about some new thing, and it's summit season, and one of those things is climate change.
Outsiders on Sunday Extra, Marcus Stefano, Jessica Kendall, and Ian Hankey. And Jessica, one of those things the media has been looking at in the last week is looking at that tension within the government, potentially between Tony Abbott and his supporters and Malcolm Turnbull. We've had talks of chocolate cakes and monkey pod lunches, and I don't know what all this means, but we seem to have an endless thirst for leadership tension in Australian politics, whether or not it exists.
Yeah, do we? Look, I don't think this is really much of a story. If you were Turnbull and you were sitting on sort of 60-odd% preferred Prime Minister, would you be really feeling that insecure? I'm not sure. Look, he's pretty untouchable in terms of the polling. And I think Abbott might be sort of having a bit of relevance deficit disorder and needing to kind of insert himself into the national agenda by talking about his position on national security and putting boots on the ground and galvanising some support around that. And look, you saw Turnbull having a bit of a crack on some of these things in his national
Well, his
security
national
speech
security speech where he talked
before the
about
Parliament this week.
we don't need machismo as a response. You could read that.
You could, couldn't you? But look, I don't think, other than that, I don't think Turnbull's got any reason really to bite on
Ian,
any of the media around this. It just seems like a bit of a beat up.
Ian, you're close to the grassroots of Conservative politics. No, you're not. Oh, you surprised me. There's nothing going on, is there?
No. The simple reality is Mr. Abbott has, as a former Prime Minister, has a view, and he is allowed to put that view. And he has put it, vigorously. Now, a lot of people, he got a lot of stick, for example, for saying that Margaret Thatcher lecture about what Europe should do. Well, a lot of people in the media dislike the success that the Abbott government did have in turning back the votes. And for him to go and advocate that policy to Europeans who, they're our betters, we should know better than to actually go and lecture them, which is a lot of nonsense, infuriated some sections of the media. Now, Mr. Abbott has a perfect right to actually advocate a case and say what worked successfully here. Similarly, he has a right to actually advocate a particular position on Iraq. And he was a bit misreported on that as well. He never said he was going to go in unilaterally. He didn't actually even say it could be Australian troops, but could also be a coalition of other Arab nations, which has been already, it's an idea that's been put around in certain sectors around the world. So I think there was a degree of exaggeration in the way a lot of this was reported, insofar as it's Abbott coming back or whatever. And similarly with that monkey pod story, I mean, that was a bit of nonsense, really, because if you're trying to have a secret meeting, you'd never have it in the monkey pod room in Parliament because it's quite open. Yeah, exactly. So you don't do that. Secondly, because the quality of the journalism sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired, the particular reporter who actually wrote that piece didn't bother to check out the facts before he wrote it. And if the reporter had bothered to check it out, he would have found there's nothing particularly secretive about this because it's been happening for 14 years.
Mark, that last point on the journalism, I mean, is there still a craving within Canberra journalistic circles for a story of leadership tension? Have journalists been sort of schooled in that in these last few years? Is that the way they've come to see politics, do you think?
Of course, because also people read the stories, and that's the issue. It's a chicken and egg problem. Are the leadership stories there because the journalists are craving them and writing them, or are they writing them because the people out in the community want to read all about the intrigue of the monkey pod room and the chocolate cake? And I think that's what was so insane. I tell you what, the ridiculousness of this story comes down to the fact that Tony Abbott is taking a chocolate cake. You can imagine him walking down a hallway, chocolate cake made by Peter Credlin, into the monkey pod room. What an absurd little term we've got for essentially a very sort of open room, as you said. And I think that what we've got here is people sort of talking about, is the Abbott camp a briefing against Turnbull? No, actually, they're quite open of the fact,
bringing cake.
You look at Tony Abbott, you look at Kevin Andrews, you look at Nikolic. They're not doing this secretly. They actually just have opinions on this stuff, and they want to air it. So they're being given time on shows like the Bolt Report. They're being given time on in the Australians editorial section. And I think that we do need to realise that the Liberal Party or the government backbenchers, that it's a broad church with a lot of opinions.
Healthy expression of a point of view, and that's good for politics, as has been this conversation. What a healthy expression it has been. Thanks to Mark DeStefano, political editor at BuzzFeed Oz, Jessica Kendall, senior communications.
Okay, first dog on the moon will commence shortly.